Hello everyone, welcome back to Clear Creek Solutions Hydrology Education videos. And today we're covering infiltration indices and some of its correlations. This is video 15 in our Hydrology 101 series. Hopefully you're learning a lot with this series. If you haven't already, you should download our hydrology terms cheat sheet. It's a great cheat sheet. It has the definitions of over 100 hydrology and hydraulics terms that you can use when referring to in your studies or your work. It's really quite useful, especially when you're going through these lessons. It's 100% free. Go to the description down below and we can get you that guide. Anyways, let's launch into today's topic. Let's talk about infiltration indices. So the direct application of infiltration curves, as described in what was the previous lesson, to large heterogeneous areas is actually quite difficult. At any instant, both infiltration capacity and rainfall rate may differ greatly from point to point. So it's actually very difficult to have a linear infiltration curve because the infiltration capacity and the rainfall that we're having on a site may fluctuate, and that will change the dynamic of that curve. And also, interflow is a substantial portion of the total runoff and will be included in the runoff computed with infiltration capacity curve determined on the test plot. So if we already have some interflow going on in the project site, that'll also factor into the infiltration capacity curves and skew the result a little bit. So estimates of runoff volume from large areas are sometimes made by use of infiltration indices. One common index is the average infiltration rate, loss rate, or W index, which may be computed by W equals P minus R over TR, where TR is the duration of rainfall in hours. The mean loss rate usually increases with rainfall intensity through the lower ranges of intensity as well. Infiltration indices are not infiltration rates, but rather indicators of potential basin recharge, which we covered earlier. So let's talk about rainfall-runoff correlations. The simplest rainfall-runoff correlation is a plot of average rainfall versus resulting runoff. Typically, the relation is slightly curved, indicating an increasing percentage of runoff at higher rainfalls. So if you think about it, obviously, if we're going to have more precipitation, we're going to have more runoff because there's overall more water in the system. Such simple relations do not account for variations in initial conditions that may affect runoff, and there's usually considerable scatter of the points about the mean time. And so I'm going to go into this. This goes back into the difference between single event hydrology and continuous simulation hydrology. And this is why a direct correlation between rainfall and runoff doesn't exactly work when we talk about practical project design. So if we look at this rainfall runoff curve, we've got runoff in millimeters here, and then rainfall showing, yes, with the more rainfall we have, generally the more runoff, but it's not really that simple of a conversation. So here's some misconceptions when we're talking about rainfall runoff. So many assume that rainfall-runoff relationships can be represented by simple relationship. So we think that more rainfall, more runoff, and by thinking about equations such as Q equals CIA, remember the flow from the site equals the runoff coefficient, the rainfall intensity, and the project area. And so we think this is a viable way to calculate runoff. However, there's a problem with how we think about stormwater events. So let's think about this project site here real quick. This is a desert. It's completely dry. Right? We basically have no water in the system at all in this point. So let's say some rainfall fell on the system. How much runoff do you think we're going to get from the system? Well, a lot of it's going to infiltrate, but it's already pretty dry. We're going to get a decent amount of runoff from this, but are we going to get the same amount of runoff from a site like this, right? This is basically the same situation, except it has rained here now. Are we going to get the same amount of runoff? Probably not, because this one already has water and is saturated. So what has happened previously in the stormwater system and the soil conditions before the stormwater event is incredibly important and feeds directly into how much runoff we're getting. So it doesn't just matter how much rainfall we're getting on the site. Previous historic conditions play a huge role in how much runoff we're going to be getting from the system, and also back-to-back storm events are going to dictate that as well. So soil moisture conditions and history of storm events matter when we're looking at runoff. It's important to learn about basic hydrology concepts, but keep this in mind. So we're learning about rainfall and runoff. It's important, but we also want to keep in mind that it's not 100% accurate and true to how things work in the real world. So we must understand that continuous simulation is a more effective way to get an accurate picture of the hydrologic cycle and stormwater runoff system. So it's not enough just to look at one stormwater event and determine that's how much runoff we get when we have this event. It's much more complicated than that, because we're looking at back-to-back storm events and the soil conditions before that event occurs affecting the amount of runoff. And we need to be able to measure that from one time step to another. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into wwhm 2012. I'm going to show you how this works in a continuous simulation software. So this is WWHM 2012. And what we do in this software is we select a location, a project location on the map. And this determines our precipitation data and our factors. This is going to give us historical rainfall data going all the way back 60, 70 years. Using this historic data, we can determine what events are likely to occur in the future based on past events and what the soil conditions and runoff is like from the site based on these historic rainfall events. What we do is in this software is we import our land use basin, and we're able to create a land use from the software. So let's say we had 4 acres of C-type soil that was flat forest. We could then run the scenario to generate a runoff from the site. And this is using continuous simulation. You can see it's using rainfall events starting from 1955 all the way to 2008 to analyze what the runoff would look like over the course of the different stormwater events. So if that was forest flat, and let's say we now made that half impervious, we're now able to see how much runoff will occur on the site, not just for one stormwater event, but for all the different stormwater combinations and back-to-back events, showing us the different kinds of runoff that we are getting. So we don't want to get into this trap of we have a project site, it rains this much, we get this flow. That's not how we want to think about things in the real world. It's much more complicated than that. And something like this software, which is 100% free, you can get in the link in the description to test this out, gives us a more accurate picture of the system. So that's another video on infiltration and the rainfall runoff correlation. You can download our free guide or our free software here in the description down below, and we'll see you guys next time.